So Keith is a pastor at Upper Dublin Lutheran Church near Philadelphia, and he is the author of Digital Cathedral, Networked Ministry in a Wireless World. And he is also working on the second edition of Click to Save. Keith has more than 10 years experience practicing digital ministry in congregational settings and speaks regularly with ministry leaders about navigating ministry in the digital age. And so without further ado, Keith, go ahead and take the wheel.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Again, it's good to be with everybody. Thank you for being here this morning. I see we almost have 200 participants, which is awesome. And we are going to break a couple times in the next hour for questions. So I think some of you have already shot some questions my way, and Sarah is going to be keeping an eye on all of those. So we'll break partway through for some Q&A, and then we'll leave time at the end for that as well. And all the materials will be available online, as Sarah said. So this presentation on digital first faith formation is one that I haven't given before. And it's actually a presentation that came out of last year's eFormation. So one of the things I love about eFormation is it's this generous community of learners and practitioners. So we're all learning from each other. So even if you're there or I'm here to present, I'm learning so much from everybody else. And so in attending workshops last year, I really started thinking about digital first faith formation. So starting with digital rather than the face-to-face. So much of the way that I think about technology, even though I spend a lot of time in digital spaces, is thinking of it as a supplement or a complement to what we already do face-to-face in the parish. And that's my world, parish ministry. And much of that and most of that's the case. But this past year, following last year's eFormation conference, I've been really experimenting with digital first faith formation. And we'll go to the next slide. And part of that inspiration has come from John Roberto. And I really enjoy his book, Reimagining Faith Formation for the 21st Century. John has a great way of breaking down all of the data that's out there about generational trends and family structures and technology. So I recommend this book to you. It's been really helpful to me in addition to hearing John speak and give workshops and collaborating with him on some projects. And in this book and overall in his work, he identifies these 5 areas as key parts of what faith formation in the 21st century should look like. So intergenerational faith formation, age group specific faith formation, both in physical places and online, family faith formation at home, missional faith formation, he calls it, to the nuns, the religiously unaffiliated, spiritual but not religious. And then the part I want to focus on is the online and digitally enabled faith formation. So that's going to be the focus of this talk this morning. John has a really helpful graphic on how we think about the interplay between face-to-face and digital faith formation. And he describes it as a continuum from gathered face-to-face with a little bit of support from online content, all the way to the left of fully online faith formation. And I'd say most of my world is on the right side, even though I spend a lot of time doing digital things, it's mainly on the right side. So we're gathered together physically. How can digital resources like showing a video help us when we're gathered in confirmation class, or we're gathered for an adult forum or a Lenten program? How can we bring those technologies and those resources into the gathered space? But in the last 6 months, especially, I've been focusing on fully online faith formation. So digital first faith formation. And it really has been an experiment with a couple projects I'm going to describe to you. So this webinar is more of a kind of a couple case studies and what I've learned from those case studies. And then would love to hear your reactions and also to see, maybe you've been experimenting with this kind as well. If we go to the next slide, I'll just share with you some of the benefits that I've discovered for digital first. So rather than making you wait through the whole thing, I'm going to give these to you up front. First of all, digital first resources are available on demand. And so much of our culture now is an on-demand culture. And we see that kind of in real time in social media, but I've been thinking a lot about Netflix and Hulu and streaming services. I mean, I hate to have to set a time to tune into something. I almost never watch live TV. if I'm watching something that's only available like on cable, I'll DVR it and then I'll watch it when I want to watch it. And so most of our content consumption is on-demand content consumption. I use my Spotify app for music because I can access an entire music catalog, pretty much any music I want anytime and pull it up, and the same for podcasts. And so we live in this on-demand world in terms of the content we consume. We also live in an on-demand world in terms of our learning. And I see that with my kids, how they access digital resources outside of the classroom, resources that are recommended by their teachers. And so, even if you're trying to fix something in your house and you don't know how to do it, I'll pull up a YouTube video and figure it out. Or if I'm trying to figure out something on my computer. So this is what I need to know, and I need to know it now, and I'm going to look it up. And so increasingly, the idea that you have to wait a week till the next Lenten program for the next installment, or like we program our in-person gatherings and formation in churches sort of like TV used to be, where you would tune in on a Wednesday night at 7 o'clock for your favorite show. Of course, and we all know like that kind of cultural shared experience has gone away. We might be watching the same shows, but we're watching them at different paces, at different times, within maybe the same kind of time or maybe months apart, we're watching it. And so how do we think about our programming to be commensurate with the way that we're consuming learning and other entertainment content? It's portable, so if you're doing it digitally, you can take it with you on your phone, and really mobile is you have to be thinking mobile first in every possible way, your website, your content. So you can take it with you. Now people are listening to podcasts, in their car using Bluetooth. Our old minivan just died. We had a 2004 Town and Country, which had like no technology. And then we just had to get a 2017 minivan. And I couldn't believe all the technology that was in that van and all the things you can do to stream. So it was like a 13-year difference in technology. And it's like, well, I can listen to my podcast. I can listen to Spotify. I can do all these things in my car now that I couldn't do before. People can move at their own pace. So they can work through, just like we do binge watching a Netflix series. People might watch it all at once in one night, or, slowly over a couple weeks. And the resources that we put available online, people can work at their own pace. They're shareable, of course, so people can share them with friends and let people know about it. They're reusable. So once you put something online, it's there. So people can go back to it. People can recommend it to others. People can discover it and use it later. It reaches a larger audience than just the audience that might be gathered for your Lenten study or your adult forum. So if you have 25 people in a room for your Lenten study, but what you're doing comes out of some digital first type resources, you're reaching probably triple, quadruple, even more number of people just by putting it online. And I think it kind of delights and surprises people because they don't really expect it from a church, really. So like, oh, wow, I've people say, oh, I think this is pretty cool that our church is doing this. So I think you can't underestimate the kind of surprise factor and the delight factor that's involved. And people are kind of into it because it's new. So they want to see what it's all about. Okay, I'll give you some examples now. So one of the examples that came right out of eFormation last year is this project I've been working on called Faith at Home. And it's focused on equipping families to find God in their everyday lives and really to support parents as they're trying to manage parenting and the busyness of life and all the challenges and the joys of raising a family. And so what Faith at Home is simply a once-a-month email that I send out to an email list of families from our church who have kids from like 0, like 1 day or 1 week up till some of them now into the tweens. And so in conceiving this project, I thought to myself, there's only so much you can take on. Like, what could I commit to do consistently enough that it would become meaningful over time, and then we could see how people react. My tendency is to jump all in and do everything all at once, and I really had to fight that and thought, you know what, I can do a once-a-month email, so that's 12 emails that goes out to my families in my congregation, and to say, we get that this is a wonderful time in your life and it's a really challenging time, and we want to be a part of that. We want to support you. We want you to help discover God in the midst of changing diapers and raising kids and thinking about who you are as a parent and a child of God. So we'll go to the next slide and I'll show you an example. This is a video embed, so once it gets going, it'll scroll up just so I can talk through the kind of materials that we include. And I should say what I'm using for this is MailChimp, which is my favorite email marketing platform. And it's free up to a certain number of subscribers and sends. And I run a bunch of lists off of this. I've never hit my limit yet. So we include different types of content. There's a woman in our congregation, a young mom, and she blogs, and she's kind of one of our featured kind of writers. She just writes, she's just started blogging, and so we link to her material. We included something on Martin Luther's thoughts about changing diapers and finding God in the midst of doing that holy work, mindfulness in parenting. And I've tried to mix up some content too. So here's Jim Gaffigan talking about being a father of 4 at the time. And I'm a father of 4, so I can relate to that. It's on YouTube and Netflix, the OA for Lent that I'm going to talk about in more depth, and then some other resources, a little quote, and just a little bit of a looking ahead. So in these emails, what I try to do is a couple things. Try to mix up types of content, so it's not just all blog posts, including some videos, and try to include a little bit of humor and variety. And what I'm also doing very intentionally is, and then each of those sections that you saw, I'm just doing like a little blurb from each blog post, because there are going to be people that only see this email that will never click through to whatever the full blog post is. So I pick out a kind of a salient point from the blog post that I want to include. And so I put it there so that if people are just scrolling on their phone, they're between things, they're killing time, between kids' activities, they can read that quote and they can take something away from that quote, and that's it. If they want to go deeper and click the link, they can go click it. They can do it then, they can do it later. But I think really bite-sized content is really important. And then this is really what I'm doing at the moment. The next step that I envision for the project is to create, you could create something like Pinterest boards. So you could port all this material now that I've curated for the last 6 months, and you could take it and organize it by theme, and you could create Pinterest boards around it. So I'm really accumulating relevant material for families that will go out 1 month, but then of course will be deleted off of their phone and kind of be nowheresville. But we can put it onto Pinterest boards, or we could put it onto like our church website, which I haven't gotten to yet, but all the content's there. So when I'm ready, I can organize it into quotes and into parenting or into mindfulness, blog posts. I can categorize it and tag it lots of different ways. So by the end of this year, I'll have a huge amount of material that we'll have as a resource for families moving forward. The feedback to this has been really positive. The gesture of saying we kind of get it, we honor it, we're here with you, really matters a lot. And I've heard really great feedback from parents about it, and even some parents who are not quite as involved as some others. So I think it's reaching people who might be a little bit, you might think, kind of on the margins of our community, but the response has been very good. So on the next slide, you'll see, in addition to doing this email, so I've just said that's all I'm doing, but we did do this one other thing. We did this live event, so with Megan Thorvaldsen, who is married to, some of you might know, Adam Copeland, who's in this kind of eFormation digital space. And Megan is a pediatrician, and she had been working down here in Philadelphia this past year at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. And so I asked Megan if she would come, because she has a seminary degree and a medical degree, to come and talk about faith and health and kids. We spend so much of our lives as parents thinking about our children's health, tending to our children's health. It's a very stressful part of our lives. It's a huge part of our lives. And so I asked her to come and think about that. And she did this live event. And I think it'll scroll for us on kind of 10 faith lessons that she's learned as a pediatrician. And what was kind of cool about this, and another aha moment for me, was that basically we have this digital first project, which is a once a month email that eventually will kind of expand later on. But when we were thinking about what we would call this, we called it our Faith at Home live event. You know, most of our events are live, and then the digital part comes later. But we had to specify that this was a live event. So, and what I imagine happening is that we'll have a weekly email. Maybe we'll build out the resources and capture those and share those in different ways. But then occasionally, because it's hard to gather people on a regular basis, occasionally at a time that works for them, which is a new time for us on Sunday morning at 10:15, we're doing these occasional Faith at Home events to gather people together. And it wound up being an intergenerational event as well, because we had medical professionals, doctors and retired nurses who wanted to hear about Megan's work. And it was a really great event. So it was digital first with the occasional face-to-face gathering. So I think at this point, we're just gonna get your feedback, any chatter, any questions you might have. So we'll pause now. We have some more things to talk about, but Sarah, how are we doing?
Yeah, so we have a few questions ready to go. One thing that I do want to address, sort of the orientation to Zoom, is that there are two places where you can send your Q&As. So there is a Q&A section, and so it's a little square underneath the toolbar that has a little Q attached to it. And so you can send your questions via that. And you can also send your comments on the chat box for everyone to see them as well. And when you do that, make sure that you are also, you're also selecting either all panelists or all panelists and attendees. So if you just do all panelists, it will just show up to me and Keith. If you do all panelists and attendees, it will show up to me, Keith, and the 200 other, our 200 other community members that are a part of this. So we have a few questions for you, Keith. Okay. I'm here as the interpreter. Naria asked if what are the open and click-through rates for your emails?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I'm usually a numbers guy. I don't know them offhand. I have some numbers on the next project I'm going to discuss, but the numbers are pretty good on the click-through rate. I think it's higher than our weekly email. You know, we send like a weekly email update to the entire congregation. I think the open rate has been pretty good, and the click-through rate is okay, which is why we do the bite-sized pieces and then let people link off if they want to. So the anecdotal evidence and the response emails back that I get from people have been positive, and the numbers are pretty good as well.
And then Deborah, continuing with the emails, how many families do you have on the email distribution list? And I think a follow-up sort of subsection to that is Jen asked if it's only sent to a specific email list of parishioners with families.
Yes, it is sent to a specific list, and that's a list that I put together based on kind of a partial email list that had existed for a group of parents when I got here. Now that was 5 years ago, but that was my working list. And then basically a couple years ago, I went through the entire pile of Sunday school registration forms where we ask people for their addresses and email addresses, which we were using for, say Sunday school updates, but not for any type of content. So I dug through all of those registration forms and did a big update. And then as people join the church, in their families, I try to add them to the list. I think one of the huge learnings for me lately has been that the more that you tailor your content to your audience, the better the response is going to be. So in churches, we are often generalists, often by necessity, but we also do that in digital stuff too. So like our weekly email includes a ton of stuff for a ton of different people. And there may or may not be something for you personally, whether it's your generation or your interest in a weekly email. So I think it's less effective, but I think targeting emails to your audience like this is much more effective.
We have a few questions about your Faith at Home event with Megan. So I think a lot of people are asking, was it only in person? Did you stream it live? Did you record it? Did you put it up on the website? Sort of talk a little bit more about the event itself.
Yeah. So the first thing we did was we did a different time of the morning than we usually do for Adult Forum. So our services are at 7:45, 9, and 10:30. And at the 9 o'clock, that has Sunday school, Adult Forum, choir rehearsal, and worship all happening at the same time. So we usually get our younger parents at the 9 o'clock because their kids are in Sunday school, and they all do their thing and then usually head out. And so our young parents miss the adult forum time because adult forum is happening at the same time as the worship that they go to, because it works best for them and they like the best. So what we did was we created a secondary slot at 10:15 so that they could worship and then scoot over to our event. And it's like no more than an hour, and there's food, and we had childcare available for them. And so we just made it easy for them. So we basically created a second adult forum slot just focused on them. We didn't do live streaming at the time. We just got the slides from Megan, and then we circulated them back via email. Mm-hmm. And again, that's a resource that we have now that we could, share at some other point. And we're talking more about how to podcast adult forums or live stream more content. But we're not quite there yet. It's more involved. Of course, it's a lot more involved. So we haven't crossed that threshold as yet.
So we have a few questions. Did you incorporate the faith at home content into Sunday worship at all, or so how did that reflect back in your gathering community time on Sundays?
Yeah, that's good. I don't think I have yet actually, like, kind of circled back, nor have I sort of done a little slip where people could say, if you want to be on our email list, please do that. People can add to our church email list, but we don't have something specific for Faith at Home. So no, it's been sort of an under the radar thing. It's only been 6 months, so it's still a bit in the experimental phase. Though the feedback has been so positive, we're going to keep at it and keep adding to it. But no, not as yet. It's a little bit underground at the moment, which is kind of fun.
And then I'm trying to distill down some email or some messages, so that way we can continue with your presentation as well.
Yep.
What kind of feedback are you getting about the content and devotional resources?
People like them. So I'm trying to stay away from stuff that's too churchy. Having Rachel blog for us, well, not blog for us, she's blogging for herself, but being able to use that content is really powerful because it's somebody that people know, and she's just wonderfully thoughtful and honest, and that's touched a lot of people, and including more like the Jim Gaffigan, or I did something from Louis C.K. because it was about raising kids and faith and stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, people like that a lot. And so that's something you don't typically expect to see on a church email. Of course there's language warnings, but people like that. So that kind of pops, and I usually put those toward the end. So It gives it a pop toward the end.
Yeah. I think, so how do you, so I think that there are a few things about how you generate content. Yeah. So obviously, you're only doing this once a month. So I think that really reduces the amount of pressure. You're not doing it weekly. You're not doing it, as a follow-up to your sermons or to your formation on Sundays. But then so I think the question was, as you ask people to contribute, how do you reduce the risk of burnout? And do you have a team of people who are helping you, maybe your youth ministry? So just continue, talk a little bit more about how you generate content, Keith.
Yeah. So I'm fortunate that I've been thinking and living in this space. I mean, I'm a parent. I have kids from 8 to 14. And several years ago in 2008, I did a sabbatical on finding faith in everyday life and faith in parenting, especially because that's when we were expecting our twins. So it was sort of like I needed to be able to find God in the midst of all this chaos that was about to fall upon us. And so I did a ton of reading at the time. So a lot of the reading and resources that I'm using are stuff that has sort of been in my toolkit for almost 10 years now, which is another thing to say, like, if you have good content, if it's good, it's pretty much, portable into different times. So think about the kind of content you already have. No, there's no team. It's just me doing it. And part of that is it's my time of life. It's a group of people that I'm passionate about serving in our church. It's, kind of part of why I'm here and what I do. And I have these resources that I've been able to cultivate, though there are a lot of sort of in the moment resources that I'm finding. But when you do a project like this, you're constantly on the lookout for material, right? So it changes your perspective when I'm watching Netflix and Louis C.K. comes up or Jim Gaffigan comes up. It's like, oh, I could use that. And you find it on YouTube and link to it. But, you know, it's just me. I get that question a lot about, you know, do you have a team and all that stuff? And, you know, no. I mean, first of all, like, I sort of want it the way that I want it, because it's a new project and I want to have it not become like by committee and cluttered, and then it loses, you know, the purpose of what it's trying to achieve. And it's a personal connection that I, the pastor, have with the families in my church. So it's like my once a month love letter to our families to say, we love you, we support you, we're here for you. And I think that matters a lot. So I don't want to delegate that, and I don't want to offload that part of it. Now, there are other parts when we build that maybe I can do that, but the tone and the content, something I really want to be involved in right now.
I think that is a wonderfully personal touch to such an important ministry, and especially like as they identify you not only as their pastor, but also as a fellow parent and fellow person, like struggling to keep their family and their faith and their marriage all sort of together in one place. And I think that one thing that you really touched on that I do want to emphasize, and Becky also mentioned this in the comments, is that you are doing some serious content curation. And I think that that's really, you know, you're not generating new content. You might be like asking or pulling from different places, asking for permission, but you really are doing some amazing content curation, and that's the secret, is that you're not reinventing the wheel. You're merely compiling them in a different way in order to present this faith at home experience.
Right. And you can ask your families, hey, do you have any great content that you think we should share? You know, just send me the link. And basically I keep track of these things with adding things to my reading list on my browser. So bookmark them on your browser. When I go through Facebook, and I just save the links on Facebook. So every month I sit down and say,
saved links on Facebook.
Right. So what do I have, you know, that I've had from before, but what do I have, you know, just in the last month or two that are on these lists? And between Facebook and my reading list on my browser, that's most of the content right there.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when do you know, and I think that this is a really big question, when do you know when to pull people in for in-person conversations or for real experiences like worship on Sundays rather than pushing out content? It's a big question. I acknowledge that.
Yeah, no, I think we're at our heart, we're people gathered around Word and Sacrament, you know, and we're a physically gathered community. I've served two churches that are, you know, traditional parish churches, and that's not really going to change, at least in the near future. So how do we reach people between Sundays? And we know people are attending less often. So how do we stay connected with them between those Sundays or between those activities and those events? There's this kind of thought in some circles, right? Like if you provide this content, then people are going to feel like they shouldn't, or they don't have to come to church. And I think that's a fallacy. I think people are going to come more, and you see that in digital marketing and social media marketing. You push all that content out, yes, but I mean, with the idea that you're building this relationship that's connected and durable. And so when people have needs, they know who to contact and they can reply back to my email, or that they feel more connected to this community, so they're going to be here more often, or they hear about needs and things they can do to volunteer and contribute, and they can do that.
Beautiful. And I think we can talk a little bit more. There's a very heated debate going on about MailChimp versus Constant Contact over the chat box. So if you want to weigh in on that, you can go ahead and do it. Make sure if you want to chat out to all panelists and attendees, you can click on the little chat bubble, which should be right underneath my face that's down here along the Zoom toolbar. And so we are sort of monitoring it and sort of bringing up comments as we go. And Keith has some ways that he has implemented this digital first faith formation, and he will share with that. And then we will wrap up at the end, I promise, with some more question and answer time for Keith.
Right. So MailChimp versus Constant Contact.
Yeah, that's a big one.
You know, it's really whatever works for you. If it's easier for you to work in Constant Contact, do it. If it's easier for you to work in MailChimp, do it. I don't feel one way or the other about it. I think I like the MailChimp interface because I think it's a little easier to use, and it's free. Like at our church, we switched from our church from Constant Contact to MailChimp. We were paying a monthly fee for Constant Contact, and it's free with MailChimp, even with a pretty large email list. So we save some money doing that. But just do whatever works for you. I mean, you want to spend your time on relationships and creating content, not spending all your time on nuts and bolts about different platforms.
Mm-hmm. Good reminder for all of us, certainly. All right. And I'm very excited for Keith to share a few more projects that he's been working on. And I think that these have a really broad reach, well beyond his parish. So I'm excited to bring these tools and resources to you all.
So a much more involved project that I've been involved in this year was called the OA for Lent. And it's a project I did with my friend and colleague, Martin Malzahn, who is the chaplain at Wagner College in New York on Staten Island. And it's really Martin's idea to do a Lenten study around the OA, which is a hit Netflix show. Not as big a hit as some of the others like Stranger Things, but still got a lot of press and attention, and has a ton of different spiritual themes that are really worth exploring. So Martin and I were talking, and he said, I'd love to do something around this. I really don't have the kind of format, the forum to do that. And I said, well, why don't we just do it online and see what happens? So, which is what we did. So we decided we'd create this digital Lenten study guide around the 8 episodes of the OA for season 1. And if you want to click to the next slide, I'll give you a sense of how we structured it. So for each episode, and this again will scroll so you can see the entire page. For each episode, here's episode 1, Homecoming. I chose episode 1 so there wouldn't be any spoilers if you haven't seen the OA yet. But we pick a quote that's relevant, an image from the episode. And then as you scroll down, you'll see an episode summary, in which we try to highlight the spiritual themes in each episode. So we're kind of calling out those themes. And we're certainly, it's not there's spiritual themes. It's not a Christian program, but there's a lot of themes that, we've kind of drawn out from there. So like this episode, we talked about callings. And so we do this summary, and then we recorded a podcast conversation that we put on SoundCloud, which went up to iTunes. And then we did scriptural references. So, what are some scripture readings that connect with that? We talked about faith, talked about callings. There were reflection questions. So, based on the episode. So here we had kind of a quote that the OA says, and then asking people to think about that, reflect on that. So there were a couple of those for each one. And then there were some suggested spiritual practices for each episode. And then some more information as you go. And we did this on Medium, which is a really wonderful blogging platform that I really enjoy. And then as it'll keep scrolling, you'll see there were some comments. So people could recommend it and people can make comments just like on a typical blog platform. And we had some people that we knew, like Rachel, who wrote for Faith at Home, but also this fellow Victor that we don't, or Jean. So that's how we structured each one. And Martin's idea of doing spiritual practices was a great addition. So we actually wound up creating a lot of content inspired by each episode. And so we did this for all 8 episodes. So the idea was you'd watch the episode and watch at your own pace. So you could binge it, you could go more slowly, but watch the episode first and then click on the episode, read the summary, the scripture connections, listen to the podcast, reflection questions that you could do by yourself or within groups, and spiritual practices that you could do as well. And we were really super proud of this project because I think what we created was really valuable and really good content. For all the things that are online, there's a ton of good content, but it's hard to find stuff like this sometimes. And we just made it freely available to everybody because it was, again, an experiment, something that we wanted to do and we wanted to try and we wanted to kind of learn how to do. And so much of digital work is learning in public. So you just have to launch something and try it and see how people respond and refine it as you go. For the 8 episodes, we mainly stuck with this format. And I think each time we did it, each of the 8 episodes, we got better and better. So Martin did the even episodes, I did the odd episodes. We'd edit together, and Medium is a platform that you can work online together. So we had the content there, and we could edit each other's work. And so that became a really good way to collaborate as well. And so watch the episode, do the study guide, watch the episode, do the study guide, and we roll these out over the course of the Lenten season. Okay.
And Shirley wanted to commend you that the episode is summarized and that you had full enough content where if the people didn't have Netflix, then they could still participate in some of the themes and then some of the Lenten discipline part of it.
Thank you. I did have somebody
that's a really good point.
Thanks. I did have somebody say, "Oh, we're supposed to be watching the episodes," at one point, because they're reading the summaries and felt pretty read in on the show, and they were like, "Oh." So then we went back and watched them. We got to be careful with spoilers. When the whole season drops at one time, so we had to be really careful, because basically we'd exegete each episode. So like I took notes. I watched each episode that I was writing about probably 3 times. Writing down all my notes and then putting it on there, and we'd each watched, and so Martin would comment and refine it. But so we got into pretty high detail on the different parts of each episode, but tried to keep it self-contained. So when you do a project like this, you have to create your own kind of platform using all these different digital platforms. So our main hub was Medium, so medium.com. And again, these are all links. I've linked to most of what I discuss in here. So when the slides are posted, you can click the link and dig into it. But Medium is a really beautiful blogging platform. And within Medium, you have your own personal profile, so you could blog as yourself. And you can do, like we did, you can create a publication. And then you can add people like Martin and I, basically we're the editors of this publication. So we created the publication, the OA for Lent, and he and I were co-editors of it. That worked really well. Medium, business model wise, is having some challenges, but a lot of people use it. I like blogging on it for myself personally, so I'd recommend that. We bought the URL, the oaforlent.com, so people could more easily find us, and it was easy to say on the podcast, that this is where to go. We use SoundCloud for our podcast, which again, business model challenges at the moment for SoundCloud, and there are other platforms like Stitcher, Podbean. There are some other podcast platforms that you could use. The nice thing about SoundCloud was it also easily uploads to iTunes. So most people listen to podcasts on their phone, and usually listen to it through the podcast app, through Apple or iTunes if you're on the iPhone. So it's an easy setup. We created a Facebook page, and so we had 240 followers that connected with us there. And we created a Twitter account, which we didn't use a ton, but we wanted to be in on the conversation that was already happening about the OA. So there were people talking about the OA, there are other people podcasting about it, blogging about it. And so we would be really sure to use the OA hashtag, which was just the common hashtag people would use. So when we post something, we'd want to try to connect with that conversation. And we use that hashtag as well as the OA for Lent. What's cool about this project also is that it's not something that we created. We, like many people, really enjoyed the show. And so there's a whole audience of people, fans who were really into the show, who would blog about it, who would podcast about it, would talk about it. So there was already a community and already a conversation that was happening. And we were making this contribution, to this conversation from our own perspective as Lutheran pastors. On the next slide, I won't go into too much in the weeds in terms of the details of this. All the underlying parts are links, but we decided that we would do a podcast because we thought that would be cool. And we really had to struggle to figure out how to do it. Like, we were starting basically from scratch. And so I reached out to people who friends and people who had been at eFormation and asked them, and I Googled a ton of different stuff about figuring out, how do you record a podcast when I'm in Philadelphia and Martin's on Staten Island? What kind of physical, materials do you need, like a microphone? You need over-the-ear headphones because otherwise you'll get feedback, audio coming out of your earbuds, going back into the microphone, and it's not good for the sound. this great little app called Call Recorder that's a plugin for Skype. So you can record audio or video calls on Skype, and we just recorded the audio. And then I had some things that were more easily available, GarageBand, which is included on my Mac. People also use Audacity on the PC. Six Colors website has some great information and resources about podcasting. Rights-free music from Poddington Bear. There's a ton of free rights-free music on that website. And then I had to set up some quiet place to record, which wound up being my son's bedroom, actually. So I used his desk and put up pillows to deaden the sound around the microphone. And so Martin and I would call in on Skype, we'd record the audio call, and then I would go back and edit it. And this was certainly the most time-intensive part of the whole project, because even when you get good or better at podcasting, the editing just takes a long time. You know, it just does, even as you get more proficient. So it took a few hours, at least, probably 3 to 5 hours. It took a long time. If you think about just, you know, you have to listen to the same podcast, stopping and starting and editing like 4 times or something, like that time adds up really quick. I did that on my day off on Fridays. So we'd record on Friday mornings and I edited it. So this was really kind of a labor of love and really what I imagined as a side project. I think we both treated it that way. But the time investment in doing the podcast was so valuable because so many people connected with the podcast. So they listened to it on the go, on their phone. They, you know, streamed it in through their car and they listened to it when they drove. So we got great response from the podcast. So even though it took at least as much time as creating the study guide, the written study guide, I thought it was really worth doing. And then, you know, I learned how to produce a podcast. The other great part about this project was that it was time limited. There are 8 episodes and we were going to do it for a short amount of time. So often we think about in churches and in digital spaces, like I'm going to start this project and it's never going to end. You know, it'll go on forever. And I felt that way when I started blogging. The idea with blogging is you blog and you blog regularly and you just do it and do it and do it. And that's how you become known and develop an audience and that kind of thing. And I think the days of that are fading. I think we're entering into this time where people are doing more serial projects. And so we did the OA for Lent for this stretch. And then, you know, then I'll do some kind of other serial project. But the thing is, the project still remains. It's still there for people to access in the near term or the long term. So I think serial projects is a trend that I'm seeing among a lot of the leaders that I see in digital ministry spaces. They just don't do one thing and do it forever. They do one thing for a while and then they move on to the next thing. And I think that's interesting and healthy. Some of my favorite podcasters, like Mihi Kim Cord and Casey Fitzgerald, who are eFormation folks as well, like they'll do their podcast for a while and they'll take a break and then, you know, they'll come back to it. And like, that's okay. I think we need to give ourselves permission to do that. Okay, next slide. So some statistics on how this played out for us. So over the course of Lent, we had about 3,500 views for this project, which was pretty cool for like a side project that we didn't put very much money into, and we didn't know how it would go. So I think we were happy with the response. And again, because it all remains online and available, we had 200 more views since the project ended on Easter, right? So it's all there. You may be checking it out now, and people can go back and access it. So just because we've wrapped up this portion of that project doesn't mean people, you know, stop checking it out, stop accessing it, stop listening. So we've had more views since we ended. And I think the next slide is even more telling in terms of that. On our SoundCloud statistics, we had 1,082 listens over the course of Lent, but we've had 336 additional listens since Easter. So like more than 33%, I'm not good at math, but it's around 30% increase, you know, additional listens since Lent ended, which is pretty cool. And that's one of the huge parts of digital first faith formation. It's there when people want it. It's there when people need it. And just because we've moved on to another project doesn't mean people can't access it. Some of the other kind of long tail pieces of this, as we move to the next slide, we got a lot of great feedback in our local settings as well as from friends online. One of the most meaningful responses was from my friend Beth, and this was very early on, I think, maybe when we introduced the project, and she was going through chemotherapy, and she had said, this is great for her because she can binge watch and check this out during chemo, and that it could be her Lenten practice, when she can't feel like she can't leave the house. So this came up almost right when we launched the project. And I thought, well, that alone makes the whole damn thing worth it, that Beth could access it in that way. And then we had a number of other people who said they had seen the show and they're excited to dig into this. People at church to say, I'm really glad our church is doing something like this. I think it's really cool because it is kind of surprising and delightful. And so people share that kind of content and respond to that kind of content. So we had lots of qualitative response from people too, that we took a lot of heart in and made it feel like it was very worth it. We also had responses on the next slide from other groups who used it. So there's a group called Marty's Mug in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and they used the OA for Lent as their Lenten study for Lent this year, which is pretty cool. And actually what was very cool was that Martin was able to Skype in with the group during Lent. So they had been doing it. They gave us a shout out. We became aware that they were doing this, and Martin Skyped in with the group during the project to talk with them about it, which was super, super cool. So here's this theology pub group in Sioux Falls, and they're using it for their Lenten study guide, which was really neat for us. And then really neat that they invited us to Skype in and connect with them. Next, it was fun to do. I did this podcast with Tony Jones and Ryan Parker called Killer Serials, where they also sort of a similar space look at online content. Like they've been very into The Handmaid's Tale at the moment, so streaming content from a faith perspective. And so they invited us to come on and to talk about the OA and what we thought about the show in general, and then some of the spiritual themes, and we were able to dig into that. So we got this kind of feedback from users, like, this is really great, I enjoy this. We got feedback from groups about using it as their own study guide. And it was nice to be recognized by Tony and Ryan and be invited onto their podcast, a larger podcast and platform than our own, to talk about the project. And that's really part of the long tail as well, that people will be engaging with this content moving forward. And so the long tail, and the long tail is a digital term people use to describe, you write a blog post and it kind of spikes, your traffic spikes on your blog. But then, with a lot of blog posts, they continue to have a life of their own. People are Googling for something and they find you, or, somebody shares it on Facebook months later, and then there's a little rush and people are reading it and sharing it again. And so because that material is available, it kind of has this extended life online. And so, for instance, like the OA for Lent was renewed in season 2, so we'll probably do the OA for Lent season 2. And then, think about for Lent next year, you could use the OA for Lent next year for your study guide. We were doing it as the season was going, and I really got jammed up late in Lent in terms of being able to get out the podcast in a more timely fashion. So if you were following it and we left you in the lurch at the very end on episodes 7 and 8, we're sorry, but we did get it done before Easter. Actually doing Holy Week, I was doing all that stuff. But like next Lent 2018, all the materials will be there. So if you want to do it with a group or on your own next year, it's there for you and you can do it. And then I think the next slide coming up is, I just want to give a shout out to another great digital first project, the Hogwarts Chaplain, that Patricia Lyons is doing. And this is totally amazing. The energy that she brings to these videos is amazing. And she does both kind of commentary on current events. And then for Lent, she was doing this series of sermicles, which is like Harry Potter speak for sermons. And so she takes on this character of the Hogwarts Chaplain, and she's totally amazing. And the energy that she puts into it really comes through in what she's doing. And the response to that has been really hugely positive too. And I've really personally enjoyed that as well. So And there are others out there. I'm sure all of you, maybe some of you are doing it, and maybe you would have ones that you'd recommend. But I know I could go on. I love telling those kind of stories as well. But I know we want to leave time for Q&A. So I'll toss it over to Sarah. Oh, something from John. Again, back to his book. Instead of thinking of curriculum as content or themes organized into sequential sessions and units by grade levels with textbooks, this is the key part. Think of curriculum as the processes and practices that contribute to growth in faith and discipleship, a far more dynamic approach than a content-driven curriculum. He goes on to say, in a network model, faith formation is designed around the life tasks, needs, interests, and spiritual journeys of individuals and families across the whole lifespan. And I think that is the last slide. So I'll toss it to Sarah.
Wonderful. So we have a few very straightforward questions and answers. So Keith's project was called the OA for Lent. So if you search the OA for Lent, it will be the first thing to pop up, which will be the Medium website. So there's that one. The other digital only faith formation that he mentioned was the Hogwarts Chaplain. So I chatted that out to the box as well. And so I just sort of wanted to touch on those two. A few people have a question about how did you tell people other than your members about the offering? And I'm not sure how much did you push the OA for Lent at Upper Dublin? Because I know sometimes you do a really clear boundary with that.
Yes. At first I didn't promote it in Upper Dublin because it really felt like a kind of larger side project. And I do think very carefully about, is this a side project that I'm doing? Is this a church project that I'm doing? And inevitably there's crossover because I'm the same person. But I actually had some reluctance at first of saying like this was a church project because there are mature themes in the show. And so I was conscious of that. But then I thought, we're creating this, we should, in the end, I came to the point that, we should be sharing this with people. So I shared it on Faith at Home, and we shared it in our weekly emails, and just put a little note about it contains mature themes, and the response was really positive. So then afterwards I was like, that was stupid. Like, are you not going to share it with your very church right here too? So I did share it. I mean, there is like a whole other level of energy and time that takes to promote something. So it took us a lot of time to create the content. Mm-hmm. I would have liked to have been able to promote the project more. I mean, we reached out to our social networks, which reaches a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So that was very easy for us to do. Promoted it, like Martin promoted it, in his circles as the chaplain at Wagner College, and I did at my church, and I, through our synod and stuff. But
eFormation promoted it as well, since you're one of our.
Thank you.
And I think it's an amazing, again, example of what you can do with something that people are already doing. They're already binge watching Netflix, so you might as well add a spiritual sort of enhancement to it.
Yeah. So I think that's, and so like now that we have the time, because we've already created the season, maybe we have more time to promote it in other ways, and reach out to people who are having similar conversations and invite them on our podcast or go on their podcast or whatever.
So I think that answered that question. And then how big is your church? I think that's something that's always like a nice sort of compare contrast.
Right. So our church.
But I want to be clear, your church is one size, but then you really make an effort, especially with a lot of your projects, to reach well outside of your church as well. So sorry, you can now share about how large your church is.
Yeah. So my church at Upper Dublin, we worship around 300 people, maybe a little more, maybe 1,000 members. Very active, very engaged church. But my previous church, we worshiped 125 people, and we had a smaller membership. So I've done it I've done this kind of work as a solo pastor mm-hmm. in a parish, and I've done it in team ministry as well. Mm-hmm. So just because people hear, oh, you're in a larger church, like, oh, well, you've got the resources and you've got the time. Well, I did it as a solo pastor too. And in some ways it was a little easier, and it was more effective because I could create something out of nothing for free. Mm-hmm. So just because you might be in a smaller setting doesn't mean you can't do it.
William has a question about, he says, it sounds like your concept of spiritual formation is just for church members. They are already well into their faith journey. How about the uninitiated whose faith needs to be formed? And so I saw the question, so I thought about it. And I think that projects like this, like the OA for Lent, as well as sort of like crossover cultural pieces, really allow people to enter into their discussion about their spirituality without needing that church space. And so I think it is this wonderful olive branch to say, you know, here's this, you know, cultural phenomenon, let's talk about it through this lens.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's such an easy transition to say, well, you know, we're going to talk about the OA, let's talk about the spiritual themes, let's talk about what you believe, you know, this is what I believe. And so I think it's a very easy way to have a conversation.
The OA itself kind of the show lent itself to that in terms of our tone, because I think we were both conscious of that in our writing, if you read through it, to kind of own our Christianity, but not to assume too much about it. And yeah, my kind of MO for trying to engage people, whether it's at our theology pub or online, is to start with some kind of lived experience or shared experience, and then ask faith questions about it or spiritual questions about it. So, you know, we're just not imparting like this chunk of knowledge or theological framework. We're really trying to listen first, engage with people about the questions that they have, and say, well, I have similar questions, and this is one of the ways that I come at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then a very practical question that we gotten quite a few questions about. How did you go about with copyright issues with using images or sound clips or video for the OA?
Right. So the music was rights free, and Poddington Bear is a great resource for that. He's got tons of free rights free music. We used images from the show, and you know, we just pulled those off online, sometimes from, you know, the website. You know, in that kind of situation, what we're doing is a little like fan fiction, you know, in terms of, you know, we're actually promoting their show by using these materials. So I think like there are some ways in which that seems pretty permissible, like a lot of shows and kind of cult followings, you know, these materials are available, and I think they're probably pretty happy for us to tell a whole bunch of people that hadn't heard about the OA about the OA. Then other than that, besides the music and the images, there wasn't anything else I think that we used that we had any concerns about copyright, because we created the rest of it.
Nice. Any other final questions for Keith, and as he talks about all of his efforts to have faith formation be digital first, or in some cases digital only? Did you mention that you had a final gathering for, did you mention that?
No, that was
you sort of transferred the digital into the in-person?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that we couldn't make happen. They were actually in-person things, ironically. So twice Martin and I were going to plan to get together to do Facebook Live videos, because he was going to be down here in the area. And so we were going to do Facebook Live and take questions and get a little more feedback and interaction from people that way. And the travel and the weather and stuff didn't cooperate, so weren't able to make those happen. And then I was going to do like a wrap up, like say early in Holy Week, to have people over and maybe watch the last episode together and talk about it. And the timing didn't work. We had a funeral come up earlier that week, and the timing didn't work for us to do that. But that was the idea, that, you know, whoever was around and was following it, we could get together in person and connect and share our experiences about what it was like to do this.